Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the kind words and the introduction. So to start, I share my screen. Okay, with the slides. Please confirm me that you can properly see everything in the presentation mode. Okay.
We can see the full screen, please.
Okay, perfect. Now I close on my screen your faces from Zoom. So if you have any question or if there is something, please just stop me because I can't see you. And I will start with my presentation, trying to keep the time. So today we will talk about monitoring of procedures and control for pesticides residuals in Italian tomato processing industry. Here you can see some outline about my speech. There will be a brief introduction on tomato and tomato production. We will talk about the tomato production in the European Union and in Italy. We will examine briefly the tomato supply chain, since it can really be relevant about food safety issues, so we need to examine it. We will focus on tomato pests and use of pesticides. Then we will examine the legislation framework, first of all at the level of the European Union, talking also about official controls and analysis of pesticide residues in food. And further, we will move to examine the Italian framework and how this legislation framework and control and procedures are implemented in Italy, specifying also the regulatory bodies and the monitoring system in Italy. And finally, we will move to some conclusion. Okay, starting with tomato, just let's examine a bit what is tomato as a type of plant and as type of plant used for food purposes. It belongs to the Solanum species. Here you can see all the information about its classification. The slides, as we were talking about previously, I will provide to all the participants the PDF version of my presentation. So something is here just for full information, and we will give just an overview during the presentation, but you can have then all the material. It is characterized for our purposes in terms of food safety by its fruit that is globular or ovoid and exhibit all the characteristics of the berry fruits. It includes its seed in the pulp, that is something very relevant for the processing, and outer it is characterized by a skin that is a thin and fleshy tissue comprising the fruit as it was in the placenta. It reminds the fruit as it was in the placenta. And instead, the seed contains the embryo and the endosperm, and is covered by a very strong coat that is named testa. And it's also relevant in terms of food processing, of processing of tomato. Its story, it originates from South America and mostly from Peru, where it was grown thousands years before its arrival in Europe. And then it was introduced from South America to Europe on the 16th century. Its name comes from Spanish tomates, that means the swelling fruit, and in Italy we name it pomodoro, which provides further meaning of or description of the fruit, since it is referred to the appearance of the berries that arrived in Italy, and they were in their full ripeness, so with an intense yellow color. And then later on, the variety changed and adapted, and also the color adapted to our latitudes. For a long time, it was considered toxic, and it started to be used for food purposes only after 2 centuries from its arrival in Europe. And the first one who thought to use to preserve and to apply some process for preserving tomatoes was in the 17th, the Italian Lazzaro Spallanzani, who demonstrated the possibility to stop the degeneration process of tomato through its storage in glass and boiling, reducing the bacterial load. Then in the 18th, Nicolas Appert invented a system for the conservation that is named currently the appertization, indeed, and it is based on sterilization. So we started to use tomato for food purposes quite late, but of course it has very relevant properties for our health. Here I reported the summary of its nutritional values. These are official data arising from the food composition table of the Italian Institute for Agriculture and Nutrition. And these nutritional values and properties are reported differentiating by different types of tomato, if it is fresh or processed in forms of puree or canned peeled or tomato juice. So you can have the information, and its nutritional properties are mostly related to the low caloric power and strong satiating effect, the content of basic nutrients and richness of minerals that cover up to 1/5 of the daily requirements. What is very important is the presence of minerals, vitamins, mostly A vitamin and C vitamin, and antioxidants, the most important of which is lycopene. And it's associated with beneficial function for our health and our body, like for instance to ensure a good condition of bones, teeth and blood vessels, and to have antioxidant properties and play a protection role against infections. So the most important molecules with beneficial effects on our health is lycopene, which is a natural antioxidant arising from the carotenoids, and it's present in very high concentration in fresh tomato and its derivatives, and it's very important for its antioxidant activity. And it's not synthesized by the human body, so it must be obtained from foods. And its bioavailability for humans is influenced by the concomitant presence of lipids in the diet, because they play an active role in extracting carotenoids from the aqueous phase of the food and transport it through mixed micelles through the human body, so enabling the absorption and the final intake of carotenoids, and also the presence of flavonoids can enhance the antioxidant activity of lycopene. What I would like to stress is that its intake in human body is higher when it is introduced in our food by tomato preserves and processed products because there it is somehow concentrated. But we have to take account the production process of tomato and the different steps of the supply chain and processing, mostly for what concerns also the fact that the tomato can keep its nutritional quality after the different treatments during processing. So it's relevant to preserve its characteristics. So let's examine now a bit the production of tomato in the European Union and in Italy. Here you can see some data arising from Eurostat, the member states, and the European DG Agri. About a comparison also here, you have about the total production of tomato in Italy and in the EU, and the differentiation between tomatoes for processing and tomatoes for fresh consumption. What it is very relevant is that, Europe is one of the biggest producers of tomato, and Italy also, all around the world. And if we compare the total production between 2010 and 2020, we can see that due mostly to the COVID pandemic crisis, there has been some sort of reduction and due to the COVID in the exports, imports, etc. Due to climatic conditions, there has been a reduction from 2010 to 2019, but then in 2020, the production further increased, reaching more or less the same levels of 2010. And this was due also to best seasonal conditions last year and some improvement in the possibility to work in terms of field production and processing. So here you have the trends, and they in fact compare the trends in production for fresh tomatoes and tomatoes for processing, and also the specific production in some European countries, and it is possible to see how Italy is the main producer in Europe. Now we have totally around 6 megatons of tomatoes produced in Europe in the 2020. If we examine the production rate in 2021, we can have data from Tomato Europe, which is the European Association of Tomato Processors. These are official data collected until last October, with some projection until the end of the year. And in 2021, the European production indicates again an increase in its production, coming back to the historical averages, and it was due particularly in Italy to the climatic condition and the favorable season. What is the current situation and what we can expect? This is again what it was examined by Tomato Europe, and is that it is very, very difficult, almost impossible to have short-term forecasts for the next year. Also, in comparing the production rate with the consumption rate of tomatoes. So due to pandemic, the consumption of tomato products through Europe increased according to the changing also consumption habits, and it caused an increase in imports. So in the 2021, the production totally is considered sufficient to restore the European stocks compared to the normal consumption trend, but it is very difficult to foresee how it will change for the next year. What it is also relevant to take into account is the uncertainty related to the climate change, because there can be some phenomena that can affect the production rate, not necessarily in a negative way, like it was, for instance, in the last year in Italy. There was an increase, but it makes more difficult to have some forecast. And it is relevant to consider the approach of producers in terms of energy costs, because normally they are increasing, and this can affect the industrial and agricultural costs and entails uncertainties on the production choices of food producers. And also there is always the risk of carbon leakage, since a very large part of European tomato processing industry is linked to tomato concentration processes that is heavily energy user. So in Italy, the industrial processing of tomatoes started in the second half of the 18th. Let's say here we see that it was the pioneer of the Italian agro-food industry, Francesco Cirio, decided to implement some factories in the Campania region in the south of Italy for tomato processing. And currently we have two main production basins that are one located in the central south of Italy, with the highest concentration of processing companies in the Campania region, and agricultural production companies in the Puglia region. And the second one is in the north part of the country, particularly in the Emilia-Romagna region. The whole supply chain is organized in two main interprofessional organizations that represent economic districts. The first one is the North Tomato Interprofessional Organization, and the second one is the Central South Basin Tomato Interprofessional Organization. So they practically reflect the distribution of the tomato supply chain geographically. Okay, Italy is a reference point in the processed tomato sector. We have official data that are provided by the ANICAV, that is the National Association of Canned Food Industry, which has a sector fully dedicated to tomato canned products. And Italy is the third largest producer of tomatoes in the world, after the United States and China. In 2020, Italy produced up to 5,166 kilotons of tomatoes. We have 115 companies operating in the processed tomato sector, and here you have some data also about employment and the turnover that is very big because it's 3.3 billion of euros. Of course, the Italian production can meet the internal need of the market, but also it's involved, very involved in export, with an export share of around 2 billion of euros. And concerning the selling through the Italian territory, the best-selling product is tomato puree. Then we have the pulp, peeled tomatoes, cherry tomatoes, and the concentrate. And also the HoReCa sector cover more than the 30% of the turnover of the sector. So we have really a big market around the tomato production sector. What it is important to examine for all aspects that are related to food safety, but also food quality, traceability, sustainability of the production system, is to take into consideration the tomato supply chain. Here you can see summarized the main steps of the tomato supply chain, starting from cultivation and growth to harvesting. And here I wanted to differentiate between the, let's say, conventional food chain with processing, distribution, retail, and consumption, and the so-called kilometer zero, 0 kilometers. So the short supply chain that is really, really spreading, where there is this closer contact between the harvesting, so the primary producers, and the local market, because it can affect, or it can be relevant, the difference between the long and the short supply chain, also for what concerns food quality and safety. Just to highlight a couple of stuff for 2 main steps. So we have to take into account that for harvesting in Italy, almost all industrial tomatoes are harvested mechanically. We can say that it applies to the 100% in the North production basin and around the 90% in the Central South production basin. We have manual harvesting only for very special cases, like, for example, fields where we have particular geographical conditions or territorial conditions that make impossible to apply the mechanical harvesting. But the most important is that we apply the manual one for some specific production, like the San Marzano PDO tomato, because it is in the production specification for the PDO. In Italy, we have different PDOs about tomato, and this is one of the most famous. For what concerns processing, it is important to highlight that we have at the beginning, let's say, and at the end of the processing, several steps that are common to every kind of product that can be listed as processed tomatoes, while in the middle, we can identify different specific phases according to the type of product, if we want to obtain, for instance, the puree or the pulp, etc. What it is important to take into consideration is that for fully examining food safety issues about tomato, but actually about every food, we have to take into account every step of the production chain, because it can affect the contamination of food and the fate of contaminants into the food according to the different treatments that the raw materials undergo during the processing. So now we are going to focus on pesticide residues. So, of course, primary production has the most relevant role, but we have to consider, and its affect particularly the content of pesticides in fresh tomatoes. But if we are talking about processed products, we have to consider also the effect of the different treatments during processing in the fate of pesticide residues and how they reach the final product. The same applies if we talk about nutritional quality and nutraceutical properties, how the different processing steps can affect the content of nutrients and nutraceuticals. And also what is important is somehow the role of consumers in applying some procedures at the domestic level, because also it can affect food quality and food safety. Here I summarized according to what is reported by, or how they are classified by the Association of Canned Product Producers, what they name the tomato red line. So the 5 main products referred to processed tomatoes. We have the peeled tomatoes, so the whole peeled tomatoes that are arising from an elongated variety. They are brightly red, the skin is removed and tomato juice is added, and then they undergo heat treatment after the packaging. Further, we can identify the tomato concentrate that is obtained from the concentration of the tomato juice and has a dry extract content equal or major than the 12%. We have the tomatoes in pieces, pulp and shredded. They are obtained from peeled tomatoes from round varieties that are reduced in pieces and shredded, treated and packed like the peeled tomatoes. We have the tomato puree that is obtained from fresh tomatoes directly by pressing, separations of skins and seeds, and partial elimination of the constitution water. And finally, we have the whole unpeeled tomatoes arising mostly from cherry tomatoes and the Datterini variety. So they are varieties of small tomatoes with a high sugar content that make them quite sweety and tasty. So these are the main classes of canned tomato that we can identify. Now, going to examining pesticides, we have to start from the main pests that can affect tomato. And what we can identify, the most important pests are referred to fungal diseases arising from peronospora, alternariosis, septoriosis, and oidium. Here you can see some picture about the effects of these diseases on both the fruit and the leaves. We can have bacteriosis causing bacterial leaf spotting and bacterial speck diseases. And then we can have insects and mites like Elateridae, black outworm, aphides, the tomato moth, the red spider mite, and the tomato russet mite. Plus, we can consider infestants, so other plants that can infest the cultivation field. According to the relevance of these diseases from pests of tomato, we have in relation the use of pesticides during the tomato primary production. So, examining pesticides, what do they are? The term pesticide is commonly used to say plant protection products, but pesticides is a wider term that covers also products such as biocides, and so biocides are intended not for plant use to control pests and disease carriers such as insects, rats, and mice. And this I can anticipate due to its widest meaning. Biocides do not fall within the remit of EFSA. We have to consider mostly the actual plant protection products for what we are going to talk about. So plant protection products are pesticides mainly used to keep crops healthy and to prevent the crops from being destroyed by diseases and infestations. They include herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, acaricides, plant growth regulators, and repellents. Usually, the plant protection products contain more than one component, and the component working against pests or plant diseases is called active substance. These substances can be chemicals or microorganisms, including viruses, for example, enabling the product to perform its action. So it's actually the component of the plant protection product that can that provide its active properties to the plant protection product. We can classify them according to their effect. So they can be insecticides if they fight insects harmful for agricultural crops, but also other kinds of insects that, for instance, are vehicles of diseases for humans or for pets. They can be fungicides if they counteract diseases and alterations produced by fungi. They can be classified as herbicides if they are used to destroy weeds, or if they are defoliants. We can have nematicides and acaricides and plant growth regulators, like, for instance, hormones regulating the crop growth. What it is important to specify is that considering pesticides and plant protection products and active substances under a chemical point of view, they are, let's say, complex organic molecules arising from different classes, like, for example, the thiocarbamates, carbamates, and several other organic compounds. So let's move to the next topic of our agenda, and so the legislation framework. What we have to do is to start, first of all, from the legislation framework of the European Union. And briefly, what we can say, it is, in general, it has the objective to ensure a high level of protection of human health, to define coherent measures from farm to fork and appropriate monitoring systems, to guarantee an effective internal market, to protect consumers including also fair practices in the food trade, and to guarantee free movements of goods within the community. It takes into consideration several aspects by applying an integrated approach covering together food, animals, and plants in order to ensure the protection and the welfare of animals, plant, and environmental health, besides human health. So everything is considered as a whole system, and it deals not only with food per se, but also with feeds, raw materials and products, differentiating between them, food contact materials, wastes and byproducts, novel food, hygiene aspects, chemical and microbiological safety, official controls, veterinary controls and animal welfare, food fraud, origin, traceability and authenticity of food, labeling and information to consumers. Briefly, I would like to make clear the differences among the different type of acts that are involved in the European legislation, because it affects also the national approaches and the national legislation, even about pesticide residues, of course. So we have to consider, we have, first of all, regulations that are binding legislative acts, and what is very important is that they are binding. So they are considered immediately binding in all the member states of the European Union as soon as the European Commission approves them. Going down about the level of binding, let's say, we have directives that are legislative acts that set a goal that the European countries must achieve. So once the Commission define a directive, each member state has the mandate to state an internal law or decree or act that received the mandate of the directives. Then we have decisions that are binding only on those to whom they are addressed, for example, a specific country or a specific company. We have recommendations that are not binding and allow the institutions to make their views known to the and to suggest, let's say, an action without imposing any legal obligation. And finally, we have opinions that are not binding and allow the different institutions to make statements. And these differences among the acts are very, very relevant, because we have to consider that for what concerns food safety, the most of the European legislation is based on regulations. So they are immediately binding for all the member states, and this, let's say, demonstrate the importance that the Commission gives to food safety for protecting human health, etc. So it's related to the relevance of the topic for the European Union, makes that the most of the legislation framework about food safety is based on regulations that therefore are immediately mandatory and applied in all the member states. Here you can see summarized the most relevant documents that are related to the European legislation on food safety, and not the most relevant, but how the European legislation framework was born, and the basis of this legislation framework. So the first very, very important document is the so-called Green Paper that establishes the general principles of the food law in Europe. And then we have the White Paper on food safety that defines the most important criteria. The first and highest regulation stating the general principles and requirements of the food law in Europe is the regulation 178 of the 2002, which also establishes the European Food Safety Authority and lay down the procedures for what concerns food safety. In here and in the next slides, you see sometimes into parentheses these cons with an year. It means consolidated to, for instance, 2021, which means that the last version is the consolidated version, which includes all the relevant updates and modifications. So you can consult the European regulations searching for the consolidated version, the last one, and it will include, the document will include immediately all the revisions and updates, and is the last version which is into force for the legislation. What is very important besides EFSA that we are going to examine more in detail in the next slides is also the RASF, that is the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, and highlights how it is important for the Commission that European citizens have access to safe and food of highest standard, but that they also are fully informed in a transparent way. I reported here also another very, very important regulation that is the 1881 of 2006. The last consolidated version is of last August 2021, that is referred to maximum levels for certain contaminants in foods. It states the maximum limits for the content of certain contaminants in food. And I put it here because it's not referred to pesticides or to pesticide residues that are regulated by specific regulations, but it can be of interest because it includes the maximum levels for other contaminants, specifically for vegetables, and in some cases specifically for tomatoes. So if you are interested in, you can search here, for instance, for toxic or potentially toxic elements, for mycotoxins, or for other contaminants that could be relevant for your purposes. So we mentioned already a couple of times about EFSA. What is EFSA? EFSA is the European Food Safety Authority. It's an agency funded by the European Union, operating in an independent way of the European legislative and executive institutions, such as the Commission, the Parliament, etc., and the European member states. So it might be considered fully independent. It was set up in 2002 after some food crisis, and its role is to provide scientific advice and communication on risks associated to the food chain. It works providing scientific outputs that arrives from the time when EFSA receives a request for a scientific advice or initiates its own activity. up to when it publishes its findings. And it is composed by three main stages that are the request, the assessment, and the adoption. What is important is that also EFSA fully recognizes, like the European Union, of course, that food safety covers, let's say, different aspects in the food chain, from foodborne diseases to contaminants to animal health and welfare, plant protection, etc. So it's important to consider the whole agri-food system when we are talking about food safety and effects on risks and effects on human health, from far taking into account the whole supply chain from farm to fork. Specifically focusing on pesticides, the European legislation framework covers pesticide residues resulting from the use of plant protection products on food or feed crops, because they can pose a risk to public health. Therefore, the European Union has established a comprehensive legislative framework defining rules for the approval of the active substances, the use of plant protection products, and the use of and what concern pesticide residues in food. The most important acts are related to the approval of active substances and the authorization of plant protection products. We have the EU pesticide database. They are established maximum residue levels, and then the legislation defines some aspects that are related to sustainable use of pesticides, and there are actions ongoing for the so-called refit, which is the reevaluation on the current legislation framework. What are pesticide residues in food? So, in practice, we have to consider some traces of pesticide that remain in treated products as food products arising from primary production or processing that are called residues. So pesticide residues are what remains from the pesticide applied in the food. And of course, the amounts of residues in food must be safe for consumers and must be as low as possible. For this reason, they are established also maximum residue levels that represent the upper levels of each pesticide residue that is permitted in food or feed. Also in feed, because we have to consider the possibility that they move along the supply chain as feed to the animals, and then from the animals to human consumers. So, what is the role of EFSA? EFSA provides independent scientific advice to risk managers on pesticide residues, in this case, based on risk assessment. So, after the advice from EFSA, the European Commission and the member states take risk management decisions on regulatory issues, including the approval of active substances and the setup of maximum limits for pesticide residues in food and feed. In the topic of pesticides and pesticides residues, EFSA works with two main groups and panels. The first panel is the pesticide peer review unit, which is responsible for the peer review of risk assessment of active substances used in plant protection products. So it provides risk assessment of active substances, evaluating whether and when they are used properly, and if these substances are likely to have any direct or indirect harmful effect on human or on animal health, for instance, through drinking water, food and feed, and also on groundwater quality. So it performs also assessments related to the environmental risks. The second group is the pesticide residues unit, which provides scientific advice on possible risks that are related to the presence of pesticide residues in food and feed. So it's really focused on food and feed safety issues, and prepare proposals regarding the definition of the maximum residue levels. It also provides support to the plant protection products and residues panel, which is a panel of experts focusing on, in general, on plant protection products. Together, the two units plus the panel have the duty to develop and revise the scientific methodologies, including scientific guidances for pesticides risk assessment. So EFSA is focusing in providing advices and risk assessment, supporting the European Commission and the member states. EFSA publishes on an annual basis a report on pesticide residues found in food in the European Union. So the report is based on data collected by EFSA from the official national control activities carried out in each European member states, plus Iceland and Norway, based on targeted and random sampling. More or less around 90,000 samples each year are analyzed. Here you have the data of the last report, and from the last year, more than the 95% fell within the legal permitted levels. So what the reports provides is to show how is the condition of the presence of pesticide residues in food in the European Union, covering all the member states, and to examine the potential risks that are related to consumer health. Furthermore, the report includes information for risk managers, based on which they can take decisions regarding the future control measures. It's based in practice on the results of the national control programs of the member states that are risk-based, and they are targeted on the products that are likely to contain pesticide residues, or for which it's important to improve the monitoring, because in the previous years there had been some food safety issues. Also, EFSA performed performs a dietary risk assessment as part of the analysis of the results. So according to the food analysis performed for the residues in the different type of commodity, EFSA performed this dietary risk assessment, and for instance, for the last year, like for the previous year, I can say the conclusion was that the examined commodities are unlikely to pose a concern for consumer health. But in any case, there are some recommendations that are proposed for improving the European control system and so ensure a higher consumer protection. Here I put some screenshot arising from the last report to show you how it focus on differentiated for the different residues in both unprocessed and processed food products. I highlighted also the line for tomatoes, so you can see here the percentages of samples analyzed where residues were quantified below or at the level of the maximum permitted level, and where there are the exceedances, and the evaluation is performed also on a single residue level, but also on a multi-residual level. All the data can be downloaded, or you can download from this reference the whole document. So you can examine all the data, and here I reported the comparison for what concern multiple residues in processed food products, and you have again tomatoes. For what concern 2018 and 2019 means that they arise from the report of the 2019 and the last report from 2020. Again, you have the information for downloading the document and to keep all the more specific information you would need. Just to summarize some aspects that are really related to, let's say, to tomatoes in practice. So in general, in 2019, around 40% of samples totally for all types of food contained pesticide residues exceeding the respective maximum residue level. And among the reasons for tomatoes, there were the use of non-approved pesticides, like, for example, chlorphenapyl and triadimethaone. For dithiocarbonates, levels exceeding the corresponding health-based acute reference values were found for zinab, maneb, propineb, and tiram in tomatoes, but without exceeding the MRLs. Some EU non-approved pesticides were found in randomly sampled foods grown in third countries. For example, for tomatoes, they were acefat, chlorphenapryl, fipronil, and permethrin. And okay, as let's say good news, the rate of exceedance in tomatoes decreased from 2016 to 2019 from 2.6% to 1.6%, just to give you some hints specifically on pesticide residues on tomatoes. What it is very important and useful is the EU pesticide database that allows users to search for information on active substances used in plant protection products, maximum residue levels for the different active substances in food products, and emergency authorization of plant protection products in the member states. Here you have the links for accessing the database that currently includes 650 records and allow search by active substances. You can search by food products. You can search for specific pesticide residues and MRLs, and you can search per emergency authorization. So there are several search criteria. Here you have the screenshot on the search for per food product. I searched for tomatoes, and then you see what you can receive back searching for tomatoes. So the MRLs for the different pesticide residues specifically for the product, and you can export the data. There are totally for tomatoes 515 entries. What it is very, very important to consider, like we mentioned several times in terms of food safety, are the maximum residue levels that are stated by the European Regulation 396/2005. Last version is consolidated to last October 2021, and it states the maximum residue levels in non-food and feed of plant and animal origin, and the Commission implementing rules. What are the maximum residue levels? They are the upper levels of pesticide residues that are legally permitted in or on food or animal feed based on good agricultural practice and the lowest exposure necessary to protect vulnerable consumers. They arise from a comprehensive assessment of the properties of the active substances, their intended use. So here you can see the role of EFSA in providing advices for defining these levels. The most important points that are dealt in the regulation are the amounts of residues found in food that must be safe for consumers and must be as low as possible. The European Commission fixes the MRLs for all food and animal feed, and the MRLs for all crops and all pesticides can be found openly in the EU pesticide database. They apply to 315 fresh products and to the same products after processing, adjusted, taking into consideration the dilution or concentration during the project. Means that it is considered the fate of the residues during the food supply chain. Overall, the legislation covers around 1,100 pesticides and states as general default MRL 0.01 milligrams per kilos that applies to all active substances where a pesticide is not specifically mentioned. Means that the regulation includes a very long list of active substances with a specific MRL. Where there isn't specified an MRL, it applies the 0.01 milligrams per kilo. This value, and we will see in a few, corresponds to the limit of detection stated for the official analytical methods to quantify pesticide residues in food. So, in practice, for safety reasons, the pesticide residue must not be detectable in case there isn't a specific MRL stated. how do they are estimated, the MRL? The MRL are estimated based on the EFSA assessment that are based on the chronic and acute dietary consumer exposure to pesticide residues using a calculation model that has been developed by EFSA. It's named PRIMO. It can be consulted in the EFSA website and is based on national food consumption data and unit weights provided by the member states, and then implements internationally agreed risk assessment methodologies. Who does what about MRLs? So, for risk assessment, EFSA verifies that the residue is safe for all the European consumer groups, including also vulnerable groups. And when a risk is established, the MRL application is rejected and the pesticide may not be used on a crop. The other step, the other action is to set the MRLs. So the Commission sets the MRL or amends or removes an existing one based on the EFSA opinions. And the Commission adopts the regulations for this purpose. Then we have another act that is the enforcement and control. So the national authorities define how and when the pesticide may be used. So the info is reported on the label of the pesticide, and the authorization is granted on a national basis because it is possible that the environmental condition and the occurrence of pests, therefore the use of pesticide, may differ country by country. For what concerns non-EU imported crops, the MRLs are set based on a specific request of the exporting country. So we can identify different, very specific roles. For what concerns official controls, we have to talk first of all about the European reference laboratories. So the European reference laboratories are designed based on the regulation 2017-625 of 2017, which states their role and their task, and they are established in the European Union for ensuring high quality analysis, uniform testing, and for supporting the Commission activities on risk management and risk assessment in laboratory analysis. There are 17 European reference laboratories designated for animal health, 26 for food and feed, and 5 for plant health. In particular, for what concerns residues of pesticides, there are 4 European reference laboratories that are for cereal and feeding stuffs, for food of animal origin and commodities with high fat content, for fruits and vegetables, including commodities with high water and high acid content, and the one for single residue methods. What is the role of these laboratories? They have the role of coordinating the national reference laboratories. So they have their correspondent national reference laboratory in all the member countries, the member states, and they have the mandate to ensure that all these national reference laboratories provide reliable measurement results and high-level performances that are evaluated through the organization of interlaboratory comparisons. The National Reference Laboratory has the same role at the national level and acts as the official laboratory for performing and organizing the controls for that parameters. So, for instance, in Italy, we have four national reference laboratories dealing with residues of pesticides corresponding to the 4 categories of the European reference laboratories. So for us at national level, they are the reference. How to analyze pesticide residues in food? We have to consider, first of all, sampling. We have a directive, the number 63 of the 2002 of the European Commission, that states community methods of sampling for the official control of pesticide residues in products of plant and animal origin. What is its objective? It's to enable to have a representative sample obtained from a lot for analysis to determine compliance with MRLs for pesticides established by the EC regulation. So it states for the different commodities, the type of samples, how do they have to be collected, stored, partitioned, etc., for ensuring reliability and comparability of measurement results. In particular, for commodities and processed foods of plant origin, it provides a description of primary samples and the minimum size of the laboratory samples, the procedures for preparing the laboratory sample, the criteria for sampling records, packaging and transmission of the laboratory sample, the preparation of the analytical sample, and the preparation and storage of the analytical portion. This is only for sampling. For what concerns the quantitative analysis, we have to take into consideration the guidance document on pesticide analytical methods for risk assessment and post-approval control and monitoring purposes, published by the DG Sante on 2020 and revised last February. That states the analytical methods for monitoring residues in food it doesn't state, it provides guidances for analytical methods for monitoring residues in food of plant origin, also in food of animal origin, but here I focused on the one of plant origin since we are talking about tomatoes, and they are differentiated per dry commodities, commodities with high water content, commodities with high oil content, and commodities with high acid content. It states the limit of quantitation that needs to be at least 0.01 milligram per kilos, and it should be met except for when we have established by the regulation MRLs at a lower level. In that case, the log needs to be lower, means that we need to have implemented at the laboratory analytical methods performant enough to quantify the MRL. For what concerns method validation, it is reported the methods that need to be considered as reference, that is the modular quecherts that is reported in this Chen technical report. So the official method of analysis is reported in the ISO EN 15662 of 2008. It's specific for foods of plant origin, and it's a multi-method for the determination of pesticide residues using gas chromatography and liquid chromatography based analysis following acetronitrile extraction, partitioning, and cleanup by dispersive solid phase extraction, named modular Quacher's method. The Chen technical report that we saw previously summarizes the precision data of the method. This is a method based on gas chromatography and liquid chromatography. Here I reported the detectors that are mostly used for pesticide residues detection. We have, the most important, or let's say tailored one, is the hyphenation with mass spectrometry or the tandem mass spectrometry, which is of course the most performant. Then for gas chromatography, we can use flame photometric detectors, particularly for organophosphorus pesticides, or electron capture detectors for organochlorine pesticides. For what concern liquid chromatography analysis, the election is for the hyphenation with mass spectrometry or tandem mass spectrometry, but in some cases or for routine analysis, also the UV detector or the diode array detector can be used. Okay, moving to the next step. Another very important supportive tools for food safety, let's say, and consumer protection is the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed. It was created in 1979 for enabling information to be shared efficiently between the member states, the national authorities, EFSA, etc., and provide a continuous service for ensuring that urgent notifications are sent, received, and responded efficiently and collectively. So it can support to really advert for food safety risks before this risk could have harmful consequences to the European consumers. There is a portal for consumers that is fully available and searchable online. Here you have the link and the screenshot on how it looks like. There is an annual report about the results of the notification every year for the previous year, and here I reported some information that can be found in the annual report 2020 for what concern pesticides. Okay, there is, let's say, the information are for pesticides, not for pesticides in tomatoes or tomato products, to be clear. They are not available. So for what concern unauthorized pesticide, the most important notification was for ethylene oxide in sesame seeds for India. The most notified category in 2020 was for pesticides, fruits and vegetables, and it is mainly related to several notifications from Bulgaria on pesticide non-compliances, mainly in products from Turkey. For what concern pesticides residues, there have been 166 notifications, and the most reported active substance was ethylene oxide, followed by chlorpyrifos, pyridaben, and chlorpyrifos methyl, just to give you an idea about the current status. Another very important aspect that is regulated by the European legislation framework is the sustainable use of pesticides. There is the Directive 128 of 2009 that is focused to achieve a sustainable use of pesticides in the European Union by reducing the risk and impacts of pesticides on human health and environment, promoting the use of integrated pest management and of alternative approaches or techniques, such as, for example, non-chemical alternatives to pesticides. So the European member states have drawn up national action plans to implement these actions that are set out in the directive, and they are related mostly to training of users, advisors, and distributors of pesticides, inspection of pesticide application equipment, limitation of pesticide use in sensitive areas, and information and awareness raising about pesticide risks. The directive establishes harmonized risk indicators that can allow to show the evolution in the risk to human health and environment from pesticide use. So the European Commission needs to calculate and publish these indicators for the European Union, while each member state is obliged to calculate its own indicator for its territory. And they can also identify some trend. So far, they have been established two indicators. The first one is based on the quantities of active substances placed on the market in plant protection products. And the second one is based on the number of authorizations granted under the regulation 11007 of 2009. It is planned to develop further indicators, which could be based on organic farming, certification of knowledge acquired by professional users, and inspection of pesticide application equipment. What is very stressed in the directive is the importance to apply integrated pest management, which is to take in very careful consideration all the different available plant protection methods and their the integration of appropriate measures, discouraging the development of harmful organisms, keeping the use of plant protection products to levels that are economically and ecologically justified, reducing or minimize the risk for the human health and the environment. So what it is very important is to have healthy crops with the less possible disruption of the agro-ecosystem and encouraging natural pest control mechanisms. Finally, we have to consider the REFIT program that is part of the Commission Better Regulation agenda. So based on this program, the Commission ensures that the European legislation effectively deliver the intended benefits for individuals and businesses, simplifying the existing European laws. And so the purpose is to make everything simpler, more targeted, and easier to comply with. The purpose of the Commission is also of doing that for particularly small and medium-sized enterprises that are considered the main beneficiaries from this REFIT approach. For this program, starting from November 2016, the Commission launched a REFIT evaluation on the EU pesticides legislation with the purpose to assess if the regulations meet the needs of citizens, businesses, and public institutions in an efficient way. And on the 20 May 2020, adopted the report of the European Parliament and the Council, which outlines the main findings of this evaluation. What are the main findings? The evaluation found that the stakeholders considered that the regulatory requirements for pesticides in the European Union are among the strictest in the world. The MRL regulation provides for the protection of human health and the environment and is generally effective, but the implementation can be further improved. Coherence is mostly ensured internally within and between all the regulations that are in force, and externally with other EU legislation and international rules. A difficulty is related to the lack of resources and capacity in specific member states, and therefore the procedures set out in the regulations are suffering for delays, particularly for what concerns the renewal or the approval of active substances. Now, moving from the European framework to the Italian framework, we have to consider that at national level, the safety of plant protection products is guaranteed through 3 levels of control and application of the food safety regulation: the European one, the national one, and the regional one. First of all, we have the European one because, as we discussed, it is based on regulations. Therefore, they are immediately applied and effective also in Italy as member states. What happens at national level? At the national level, the Ministry of Health implements the guideline of the European Commission in its territory, transposes the directives, and applies the regulations on plant protection products. So the most important committed authorities is the Ministry of Health.
Sorry, Claudia, sorry to interrupt you. I think we are approaching time limit, so...
Oh, sorry, I will go very quickly,
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, then we have the consultative section for phytosanitary products that provides technical scientific opinions for agroeconomic efficacy, chemical, physical properties, toxicology, etc. And then we have the regional level with the health departments and the ALS that implement the official control plans in the plant protection products sector. All these data are provided at first to the ministry and then from the ministry to EFSA and the European Commission. Then we have a national control system which works with centralized and regional administrations and local health authorities. It's very, let's say, integrated and complicated, but it's organized in a way in which we can ensure, even at local level, an appropriate controls and analytical control activities at local, regional, and national level to perform all the necessary monitoring and then provide the necessary data. For residues in food, we have the Ministry of Health, the regional health departments, the inspectors of the local health authorities, and finally, the official control laboratories. We have established the annual control plans and the criteria based on which the sampling must be performed, standardized, and we have specific guidelines for the national control laboratories that needs to be accredited and needs to apply methods, validated methods of analysis. Of course, they are linked with the national reference laboratories and with the European reference laboratories. This is the last annual report published on 2020 that is referred to 2018. And just as a curiosity, let's say I reported the non-compliances concerning tomatoes and tomato-derived products. And further, the next relevant document, let's say, is the National Action Plan for the Sustainable Use of Plant Protection Products that is implemented by the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry of Agriculture. And it includes aspects. It corresponds to what we saw previously for the European level. So it's the national one, and it includes information on actions, indicators, monitoring, research and pilot implementation, coordination of control activities, and coordination measures for implementing and update the plan. Specifically for tomatoes, we have authorized 159 pesticides classified as it is reported here. Here it is how it is organized at national level, the National Phytosanitary Service under the control of the Ministry of Agriculture, and with National Phytosanitary Services and a committee which provide advice, and finally the National Network of Laboratories. So it's just how it is everything implemented at national level. And here you have summarized the role of the central and the service and of the regional services. To conclude, I would like just to summarize some relevant aspects. The European Union provides a strong legislation framework and control and monitoring system in support to food safety and for ensuring consumer protection. This framework is then adopted and implemented at the national level. And so the Italian one, of course, it's fully integrated with the one from the European Union. What is very important is to apply an integrated approach to food safety, considering the whole food chain and potential exposure to multiple contaminants. So not only to pesticides, but eventually also to other contaminants, as well as to combine human health with animal and environmental health, so applying the so-called One Health approach. It is fundamental to implement and share good practices at both the primary production and the processing level, which can highly support food safety, but more in general can support the whole agri-food production system. This is even more important if we manage to engage all the agri-food system actors, so producers, processors, researchers, policymakers and local authorities, food inspection and control agencies and consumers. And we have to consider the opportunity to strengthen the tomato supply chain, first of all, of course, about what concerns food safety, but also for what concerns food quality, for example, with the development and use of active packaging to extend the product shelf life, keeping the nutritional and sensorial quality, authenticity demonstration, traceability, for instance, by developing integrated traceability system based on on-site, in-line and offline monitoring system and ICT solution, and sustainability. Also in a view of circular economy. Just as last slides to show you how we can also support you. This is a slide introducing Metro Food Array, which is the infrastructure that I coordinate. It's a European infrastructure involving 48 institutions dealing with food quality, safety, authenticity, and traceability. We provide metrology services in food and nutrition for enhancing food quality and safety, and services are addressed to researchers, policymakers, food businesses, and consumers. We have analytical facilities, We have plans for studying the different steps of the food production chain with environmental fields, processing pilot plants, etc. And we have a big electronic infrastructure where to share and integrate data. So we can support also in analysis and control of pesticides. Just to give an idea, we have more than 130 analytical lab facilities, and many of them deal with analysis of pesticide in different food matrices. So let's say we can support providing analytical support, but not only for studying the processing, for setting up better process conditions, or just for providing advices where necessary. Sorry for having been a bit late, and thanks for your attention.